the second part of the discussion I had with Blake Larson and Alexander Lay, both my close friends and comrades during the days of building Easy Taxi for Rocket Internet back in 2013 to 2015. So there were lots of stories and we have done lots of reflections. So this is the second part where we talk about three things. The first, the impact of Rocket Internet on the tech ecosystem in Southeast Asia. Second, challenges of fragmented markets in this region where, of course, if you have experienced, you know what we're talking about. Third, the lessons from global expansion and resources allocation. Blake, in particular, led Lalamove's global expansion after his Rocket days. And over, I think, 8 or 9 years, he has seen a lot, he has done a lot, he has experienced a lot. So I hope you enjoy this discussion. This is episode 92 of the Impossible podcast by Momentum Works.
But this is like the crazy stuff, right? And then maybe we can talk about the good stuff about Rocket, as like an influence.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like the impact there, and I think the mindset. So that mindset of just operational and execution, overdrive, which you do need to be an entrepreneur. It should be focused, but to survive, I think they bred a lot of that mindset in Southeast Asia. I always say they accelerated tech development in this region by some number of years. I don't know.
By a big quantum.
By a lot, right? Not just because those people also went on to start companies and run companies, but just the mentality of how do you tackle such fragmented markets? And build something substantial and meaningful and get a lot of youth and energy behind it. I think they not the only ones, I'm sure, but an impetus for the region in a very healthy way.
Once in a while, some journalist from somewhere would come and ask me saying that, hey, there's a bubble forming in this sector, too much money is going into getting into this sector, there can be too much subsidies, etc., etc. Is that bad for the region? I always say that it's good because a couple of things. Any investment that gets into this sort of helps with the infrastructure. Somebody else is going to create supporting infrastructure for this company to work. And it's going to help with talent because people are getting a sense of, how accelerated, operations, etc. are like.
Yeah.
And they also create a bunch of people, I think lots of our alumni, who are not satisfied with the status quo. So many people left Rocket, they create new companies. And I think in general, it's just positive and it also forces your competitors to be more on their toes.
Yeah.
Right. In many countries, you look at the sort of the traditional industries. Slow but very profitable. So you have someone who comes in and disrupt, and he forces everybody else to say that, okay. Look at the taxi companies in Southeast Asia. Everyone wanted to improve the customer experience. After all this ride-hailing came in, they want to build their own tech. They make payment easier. It's
well, look at Bluebird today.
Yeah.
Pretty good company now, right? I haven't looked at their stock or anything like that, but just by
integrated the tech.
Yeah, the tech and the experience is pretty good now.
It's still not as good as Grab, but it's much better.
But they didn't get $13 billion of investment to get to where they're at, right? So the ROI might be better.
What do you guys think of the quality of the various networks that follow? Because Rocket would be the OG one, first one. Because they spent hundreds of millions in the region. Before that, you probably couldn't get a chip for a few million.
Yeah.
So that created one network. But then you have the offshoots of each venture too. You have Zalora alumni, you have Lazada, you have Food Panda alumni. Then you get the Grab alumni. Then you get
Gojek. Even Uber.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talent in the region still because of Uber.
I was recently invited to an exclusive shop alumni one. It's on my LinkedIn. I got the invite from Nick Nash, so he has another group doing this. And it's very interesting though, because I'm curious to think what you think about the various groups. Because there was this one introduction phase, I think 70% of the alumni in that group for Shopee, they were all doing agency work now, which means they weren't really building new ventures. So I kind of think, do you in your circles, do you see?
But agency work is necessary, right? Because it helps all this ecosystem.
It's a necessary because it's very fragmented.
It is very fragmented,
and it's very hard to execute good stuff. But it also shows that there's a lack of hard problems to solve or mindset around that, or because I'm curious to see for what you see in your online, is anyone building meaningful things?
For me, one part of the pain I had when I was at Rocket is that I could see what's going on in China. I think a few months into Easy Taxi, I went with Paul Maleshki to Shanghai to visit Kuaidi. And then I visited Didi in Beijing.
Okay.
And the two companies eventually merged. Over Uber's purchases in China. And I look at the scale that they are doing things. I look at the tech that they were building and the things they were figuring out. the talent they were acquiring. And I just always felt that why the hell am I in Southeast Asia? If you don't see what's going on there, it's fine. And especially now looking back 2013, 2016, best years in tech in China.
Why do you think it was able to go faster there?
Yeah.
Like just like what is the cultural bits of that like
I think couple of factors. This couple of years, the loss of Chinese business to try to expand into Southeast Asia. So I'm doing a lot of reflection comparing the two ecosystems. One thing about China is obviously single market.
Yeah.
And I would argue that China and US, two large single markets, and there's nobody else in the world which will fit into this bill, like very, very large single market.
Yep.
And the same language, good infrastructure. I mean, of different kinds of infrastructure. US had good infrastructure which was built like years ago. And China had the new infrastructure, like high-speed railway, the logistic network,
and you had a few powerhouses where they had alumni, right? Like the Alibabas have been around a while, right?
They have been around for a while. I think just having an alumni is not enough, right? So you have all this growth. I mean, back then it was also
it's the alumni, but I mean like the belief that something can be built.
That's true.
Southeast Asia, where's the belief come from?
The belief something can be built, the belief from investors who are willing to.
Yep.
I mean, just look at how many rounds of money that Meta had raised before they went for IPO.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't have the numbers in my head of the whole ecosystem, but I think the US investors probably spend much more money in China compared to what they have ever been doing in Southeast Asia.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, SoftBank exists still today because of Alibaba, right? Like, that is.
But yeah, 2014 was the time when Alibaba went for IPO.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was the biggest IPO
in the world, the biggest listing. Yeah.
Then that got more money to be reinvested. I think for Southeast Asia, there has not been a fantastic exit.
We're still there today. Right?
Where lots of people get rich, they were thinking that, okay, where should I deploy my money? And of course, a large portion of that gets into VCs and gets into founders.
Yeah. So we're still there.
Right. I think the early stage guys have made significant money. Like later stage, probably not so much for Southeast Asia, right? So
I think still the amount compared to what the
of course. Well, because it's a fragmented market. It's not one big.
And I think like VCs finally they're probably looking at Grab.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, that's the biggest success in Southeast Asia, unless you guys can think of like a better one, like just
Gojek
or Shopee, maybe Gojek, maybe not anymore. I thought at one time.
Early stage.
Yeah, but I mean,
late stage, not.
Like, okay, Shopee, maybe, but look at the money that's gone into Grab versus their market cap. It's about dollar for dollar right now.
Yeah, great.
Give or take, right? Yeah. And so it's like, it's not that people didn't make through that, but it's not so outsized and it didn't keep continuing to run. And maybe it will, maybe it won't, but like it shows the challenge of the fragmentation here.
That's a good point.
And like, I think I didn't recognize that. Definitely Easy Taxi, but I saw it more and more at Lalamove is that like the economies of scale for Southeast Asia for tech are just not there. I mean, there's some, but particularly if you have any kind of operational bit, like again, the simple languages, having to hire local teams, having different, like you can't consolidate and like the efficiency and the margin that can come out of a business because
think about from leaders' point of view, right? I mean, the same thing. I mean, Lalamove, Grab, or whatever. The same thing you have to think about 6 times because can you send a manager for Indonesia to work on the ground in Vietnam? So it's very hard.
Yeah.
You multiply that across all the operational aspects, and then that gets translated into the mental space as a leader you have to figure out. It's challenging.
I think the important insight is that you can build a category this way, but you have to be very realistic on the market sizing.
Well, and the amount you're willing to spend too, right? To get there, right? Based on the market size.
Correct.
Like, well, let me give you an example. Like at Lalamove, this is a perfect example. It's China. We had 300 cities, roughly, give or take, represented 65% of our deliveries and almost 90% of our revenue for GMV. Right? Like that shows you the level of effort for the business that I was running in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Like on a city per city basis, my cities were doing way more deliveries. But the significance on a revenue or top line. And then, so it just shows you the economy scale right there. Like I had the perfect juxtaposition of looking at the two businesses and being compared against China all the time and being like, I'm killing it as far as like driving volume, but the profit that you can get out of it, and the cost structure that supports it is just completely different.
It ties back to your question of like why China was probably more productive, right? It's just at the end of the day, I think in terms of the big and the small, the big is the government macro. They can provide the infrastructure and drive the incentives and policy, and then it's what you said about like the Alibaba guys on the ground level, right? But when there's a big disconnect, you need both. You need so you're constrained by the macro, and the macro is not going to be that big on a distributed wealth perspective, right? So you can't capture that.
So one discussion, I think I told some of my friends about it. So it's between a large Chinese tech platform and a large logistics player in Indonesia. And over dinner table, I was there. And the guy from China was saying that, I mean, because they've examined the logistic efficiency in Indonesia, saying that how can we double that? The Indonesian guy who studied in China, who speaks perfect Mandarin, was saying that, well, just go to our warehouse, just go to our trucks. I mean, when do you see our trucks going above 30 kilometers an hour in Jakarta? This is something we can't fix. Go to our warehouses, and most of our warehouses, we get out of warehouse is immediately traffic jam. I mean, I've been to China and look at every logistic part you have. I mean, the government connects the expressway to it.
Yeah, correct.
The level, I think if you listen to Oyin, I think David Friedberg the other day talked about the electricity. So
Yes.
So last week I was in the city of Yiwu, where like 33 million e-commerce parcels are sent out each day. And when I talked to factories there, they said, I mean, that they examined setting up factories elsewhere, including Vietnam. He said, nowhere they can get the rates of electricity as competitive as they can in China.
Yeah.
And that's a big factor.
And you're bringing 100 nuclear plants online, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to drive that basically down to zero on a unit basis for these companies.
And sometimes you get into manufacturing, get into operations, and look at cost structure, you get surprises of why things are structured in a certain way.
And I think like the incentive for a place in like maybe Indonesia, Vietnam, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is like labor generally is still so cheap. The impetus to drive productivity and efficiency, it's just like, it's just easier to get more people because it's cheap, right? But that doesn't drive productivity or efficiency of an organization. It may solve the problem and it may allow you to grow at the speed you're growing, but it's like a different way to think about things because it's like, it's just easier to get more people.
Yeah. And that actually goes back to the same issue that we're figuring out. I was telling you earlier about being a founder, right? Sometimes, I mean, you are just so good at doing things yourself. But you need to empower the team to be better at what they're doing so that you become less reliant on you. And it's the same thing here, right? You hire more people short term, you put patches to the problem, you make it faster. But in the long term, it's not healthy because you end up having like bloated organizations.
Absolutely.
But how to balance the short term and long term is...
My point is also that each incremental worker, you don't notice it. Yeah, right. Right. So I think that's part of it. It's like, oh man, we all of a sudden have an extra 10,000 workers, but like I didn't notice any change in my expenses for the first 5,000. Yeah.
Feature of where we are in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So like, and so some of this is just timing. Sometimes there's like macro things, like, and I think it's something that not the founders should think about. Actually, it's probably more for like investors to think about. Is like when there's tipping points in these kind of dynamics that force a step change in the underlying cost structures. Yeah. Right. Out of necessity. Yeah. A founder, you can't wait for timing. These are things you can't control. But from an investor, you probably pay attention to like from a return standpoint and like where it's going.
One thing you can probably tell from first-hand perspective, I think a lot of them did well is that, I mean, you mentioned about 300 cities in China driving 90% of the GMV. Yeah. So now we're looking at lots of Chinese tech companies trying to expand outside China. So a typical challenge they have is that whatever unit they have outside China is peanuts compared to them. And if it's evaluated by the same metric, by the same sort of resource allocation mechanism, they will not get
They will never do it. Never.
So you guys figured it out well. I mean, even though the global business outside mainland China is small, you still get resources, right? You still get to do things.
Yes. Yes. But like the input, like we constrained our resources a lot compared to a lot of like very well-funded companies because we saw that unit input was so much more needed in the global business than the Chinese business. So it's like, it's a simple ROI, right? It's like you put 5 in China to 1, and then the productivity of that dollar goes so much further. And so in a good way, it built like the frugality and the efficiency from like day one, which allowed us to like, go through some of the ups and downs that are just the macro cycles that weren't in favor, right? Whether it was funding, whether it was economies, and it built a resilience in the team. But yes, like you'll never see the return profile. I'd be interested to hear, like you work with a lot of Chinese companies, their perspective on like the necessity to expand, particularly operationally heavy. Like maybe if it's more tech or different, like, if like it's all direct export stuff, like of a product, it's a different game. But like more from the space that we're in, like how did look at JD for an example, they went to Indonesia, they've done hundreds of millions of dollars because I talked to them several years ago providing delivery, and they're like, we're nowhere with this. And then I think they retreated, right? Like
they retreated from both Indonesia and Thailand,
right? And so it's like biggest market in Southeast Asia, but like there's no like, I think they just sense it's like it doesn't make sense to keep spending that money. It's better to defend. It's actually more efficient to defend our own space.
So what's the lesson then? Right? So like if you're a Chinese trying to expand, like what
I wrote a whole book about it, but
that's why I'm teeing it up, right?
Here's the book.
I've seen that the buy now and I don't think flashing live. Speaking of live commerce,
YouTube should really, really close the loop of buying as that it becomes much easier for many contracts. But anyway, so I look at that. I mean, I think the bigger challenge for many of these companies is that many of the founders they know China intricately well.
Yeah.
They don't know any of the outside markets because the market in China requires so much effort to defend. There's so much competition. It's very difficult for them to spend their mental space on different markets, especially when you have multiple markets. Each market would give you feedback which is different from what you see in China. You need to make a decision. And if you are not familiar with the market yourself, you gravitate towards someone you trust in the market. But if the someone you trust in the market keeps telling you things which are different from your own cognition, your own life experience, at some point of time, you are either going to say that, oh, this market is just different, or you're going to say that, okay, this guy's incompetent. And the latter seems to be the more common sort of way that things will
I felt that way at times, for sure.
Just look at
no, but it's true.
Yeah,
it's true, right? Like, and of course, the market's different.
Yeah,
right. That's the thing. Like, I was telling my team, like, of course, every market is different. Yeah. So let's figure out what isn't different. Yeah. But and is there a business in what isn't different?
But then you should. I mean, think about back to Rocket days. Like every month you capital call, you decide. I mean, how much money is allocated to which market. How do you fucking do that? How do you do that if you don't know the market? I mean, everyone in each market will tell you that, okay, because of this peculiarity, we need more resources in this way.
Yeah.
And somebody else in another market will tell you something different. And also another dimension is that, okay, a bigger market will tell you that, okay, because we're big, we need this.
Yeah.
And a smaller market will tell you that, okay, because we can potentially have more growth, that therefore we need this. And all these things come in.
That's why the operating model of Rocket makes sense on a month-to-month basis, because you can really tune every month. And then it's like a very data-driven German approach where they would look very heavily at the KPI stack.
Yeah.
And so that's why every month, it kind of makes sense on a frontier when you don't know.
One of the things I talk to most founders at this point, like, it's about expansion. And like, what are the criteria? Yeah. Why do you expand? When do you do? And I think you will see less and less models go the rocket, where you go to so many markets so early and then be like, well, because like, it's so risky to go that way that like you're interpreting data as being, because I've seen markets like go really slow and then be the best market for Lala Move over time, right? And like you're like, if you looked at the first 18 months, you're like, this market's terrible. But we had confidence in the product market fit from like your home market typically, and we had a foundation there that we didn't have to over resource things. But if you just go so wide so quickly, I think you're really playing with fire as far as resources. Like, you're making a big gamble that you'll get some insight from some market that actually helps you with that capital allocation.
It's quite hard.
And it's really hard.
And nowadays, I mean, you look at this food delivery player, Meituan, right?
Mm-hmm.
China,
it tries Saudi, right?
It tries to expand. I think now they're the top player in Hong Kong, and of course, people sort of argue that Hong Kong is not really outside China, and now they're going to Saudi, and they had the opportunity to buy Foodpanda in Southeast Asia, which they didn't. Which I think initially I was thinking that, okay, I mean, buying Foodpanda will force you to really like take over something, they run it, and you have the capabilities, you have the resources to make it more efficient. But then I thought about it again. They're probably doing the right thing by going to Saudi Arabia, because look at Alibaba buying Lazada back in 2016. We can't say it's a right or wrong decision, but they definitely had to spend much more resources trying to figure out the peculiarities of each market in Southeast Asia. Well, as for Meituan, what they do is operational heavy. Supply, demand, and I mean, two types of supply, right? The food as well as the riders.
Yeah.
And they can easily get stuck in the market. Yeah, they can easily get stuck. So from their point of view, they have to be very cautious. I mean, if they go into one market, they have to better have a good chance to win in that market, have a chance to concentrate that their limited, sort of overseas expansion resources, limited managers who can function in overseas markets while still understand the core of the organization into that market, win that market before they move on to another market.
I mean, I tend to agree the strategy it's a long-term strategy in a good way, because it's like, look, our China business is enormous. We cannot jeopardize this. We see potential outside, but like, we don't need the outside to survive or to succeed, right? And so with that, they can be a bit more patient in what learning looks like, and definitely constrain it's way cheaper to like build your own market and in the way you want than to go spend a lot of money, try to integrate a different culture, as you said, with like Lazada or whatever. And I think they probably learned, like, for me, this is like actually a really good move. And they're like, hey, we're not trying to win global expansion in the next 2 years. Why do we need to?
Well, it ties to also the macro.
Yeah.
Like the time that we were doing this, there was a lot of easy money. Squeezed over from, just whatever loose rates to right into VC.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the forcing function, like, well, there's so much money, you might as well deploy it. And then it probably kind of managed the whole culture of big money expansion, right? And like, so what do you tell founders these days that if they're looking at expansion? Like, what's the advice? Is it a slow kind of like a Lala Move approach?
Yeah, well, so like Lala Move's unique too because it started in Hong Kong. So like it's like starting a company in Singapore. Like you were by necessity at some point if you are going for a VC model of any kind, right?
Correct.
So like that gives you a different framework than somebody who has like starts in Indonesia with big domestic markets. I was just in Jakarta talking to all these founders, and founders always more and more, and I was like, well, are you dominating your market? Do you feel that like if you expand, it's not going to either jeopardize your cash or your talent? Because at what expense? Like wherever market you're going to is going to be smaller than Indonesia. So like the hurdle to expand, if you're not just
very high,
it's very, very high. And I would say that for most markets in Southeast Asia, with the exception of like Singapore. Like even if you're in Malaysia, it's like, but like the GDP per capita is there, and it's like you could build a business that like if you wanted to then go expand, like you should feel good that your domestic business isn't going to go under, and you're from there, so like it's probably in the middle case, but like
it's interesting because like if you talk to just real businessmen, just like China businessmen, that's like the default mentality. Just like have a very strong business, then think about whatever afterwards. But I guess in the tech space, because of where we've been in the past decade, it seems like a lot of the young founders I meet these days, they're always like trying to jump ahead to the next market. But they haven't even solved very strong product market fit or even
their tech
stable. So many issues. So,
but in a good way, the dry up of all the funding has forced these companies to really rationalize spend. And so they actually know if their business model is sustainable. Like, for example, you can look at all of like the bike sharing and stuff like this. Those were not great business models, but the capital forced them to go so fast that like when the funding dried up, there was no business left. Right. So anyway, it makes you really understand your business model.
There's a reflection about the business model of like shared power banks it's a very interesting business model because initially people were saying that, okay, we need to invest in this business model and lots of companies receive lots of money. And because people believe that it's become a consumer entry point for a lot of other things, it didn't. But a few years later, when the capital started to get squeezed, they started forcing all these companies to make money, and these companies realized they can actually make money.
They can
because they build a consumer habit to always always charge. And this time I was in China, I was like comparing I got used to that as well, right? You don't bring a power bank with you. You just go somewhere, sit down.
It's so convenient.
And you
change behavior.
Yeah, you take it for default. There's always a stack of rental power banks there. I realized the price that I'm paying for this has been rising from in the past was nothing to 1 yuan per half an hour. Now it's like some of the places you pay 4 or 5 yuan per half an hour.
Well, solving a convenience utility makes sense, right? So
and for many people, it's just sure, I will spend on it. But what I've been reflecting is that if it's not for the early crazy amount of burning,
sure, you'd be waiting years to actually get that.
How will the consumer get into this habit? Like
no,
it's dependency
for sure. In consumer businesses, money makes a big difference, right? That's why VCs are willing to bet a lot. But you have to really believe in the change in the behavior is going to come.
And also within the time span that the amount of money you do, you throw in a market, that actually does change the consumer behavior. Because before that, you don't know.
You're right.
It's based on projections.
Yeah, you're right. But what I would that's a very good point, right? Like the money accelerates change in behavior as much as the product market fit. Probably. Most actually, there's certain ones like ride hailing that probably like it's so much better than the incumbent. Like what you were doing, the behavior is going to change. But for most things, people are resistant to change. Right? Like in everything in their life, it's just like a natural default, especially as we get older. So like the money really helps do that. But it also burns companies that might have been good companies out, right? Like there's a lot of things that go out. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. So
well, I think a good framework is that like maybe if you're a young founder starting up, there's nothing wrong with focusing on fundamentals. Like we said, focus on your core market, make sure you understand the product market, go through the cycles. But I mean, like if you have a very clear vision or you have a very, very good clarity around like what that could be at scale, right? So then maybe you could kind of play this big VC game and try to convince them. Of course, that depends on the macro. Is there enough money to go around? Are people distributing? This kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's very interesting because Sam Altman recently tweeted, tell me what you guys think about this. Okay. If you strap a rocket to a dumpster, the dumpster can still get to orbit and the trash fire will go out as soon as it leaves the atmosphere. Many important insights contained in that observation, but it's also better to launch nice satellites instead. It's very telling, right? Because we've built companies like this in the region. Like Grab was kind of pieced back together in reverse, right? And then, as you were saying, even now to this day, it's not even that great in your perspective, right? So,
right. Like it's good, but like
service is great. Yeah,
it's not like it's there. It's ubiquitous, right?
Yeah, correct. Utility is there. You need it no matter what.
I don't know. We all have perspectives on this type of stuff, but it's like each situation to me is so nuanced that I try not to get caught up in like quotes like this because it's like maybe for someone that is absolutely their reality. Yeah. And for most people, maybe it's not. And so like,
I think for most people it's not.
Right. Now, for most people it's not. But when you haven't, like, particularly first-time founders and stuff, and younger, like you don't have no filter, and you have no context and filter. So it's really hard. Yeah, you have to be really thoughtful of like what you're trying to emulate and learn from versus like what your vision and your reality of what you're building is.
Which is why the founders like an Adam Newman has reality distortion abilities.
Yes,
people will see that and be like, oh, that's the model, right? But
it's just
not necessarily, right?
Like they both have they have that superpower.
Yeah, they do.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's a very different game than maybe your own context.
Yes.
Right? And you got to really compare it carefully.
You really have to think about that.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Blake Larson and Alexander Le, two close friends with whom we built some of the earliest rocket internet companies in Southeast Asia. This is part 2 of the whole conversation we had, and this is episode 92 of the Impossible Podcast by Momentum Works. Do like and share our podcast if you enjoyed it.